Now, Libya's fragile ceasefire is in doubt after warring sides failed to reach a breakthrough during 8 hours of talks in the Russian capital. So the warlord Khalifa Haftar did not sign a deal formalizing the truce, but Moscow says the talks are not dead. However, the outcome has angered Turkey's president. Recep Tayyip Erdogan is accusing Haftar of running away from the negotiations, and he had this warning for Haftar's forces.
In the coming days, we will carefully monitor the choices that will be made between Haftar and the legitimate government. If Haftar's attacks against the people and the government of Libya continue, we will never refrain from teaching him the lesson he deserves.
Well, Russia, which supports Haftar's campaign, says it will continue to push for negotiations over violence. But there have been reports of Haftar's forces gathering in southern Tripoli, threatening the truce that was brokered by Turkey and Russia earlier this week. So we have three correspondents covering the rapid developments. Mahmoud Abdelwahed is in Tripoli. Jamal Shayal is in the Turkish capital, Ankara. But first, let's get an update from Step Vassin in Moscow. So, Step, when Moscow says that the talks are not dead, what are they basing that on? And so what happens next?
Well, Doreen, after not giving any explanation for most of the day why Haftar suddenly left Moscow without signing the agreement, now the Ministry of Defense has released a statement in which it says that Haftar positively reacted to the final agreement, the draft agreement on the ceasefire, and that he wants 2 days to discuss this with his allies in Libya, meaning the local tribes. They also said that the main outcome of the talks on Monday are that both parties have agreed to this indefinite ceasefire, and they also say that this all has created a positive atmosphere heading into these talks in Berlin, which are scheduled so far still for January 19. And they also mention that these inter-Libyan problems that have piled up over the years need thorough work. So this is interesting because hours earlier, Minister of Foreign Affairs Sergei Lavrov had a very short statement, didn't mention anything about a new deadline. He was just saying that the talks were inconclusive. So something must have happened in the last couple of hours. So the work has been continuing behind the scenes. And this must have been a new agreement or a new statement coming from Haftar agreeing on this 2 days deadline. I also spoke to the head of the Russian-Libyan contact group here in Moscow, who was actually in the talks yesterday for 8 hours. And I asked him what actually went wrong. And he said, well, Haftar came up with some new conditions at the last minute, bringing them to the table. He said it's nothing to be worried about. He was very convinced that he will sign eventually. When I asked when this will happen, he said he can't say exactly when. So now we have this 2-day deadline.
Okay, Step Vassin, thank you for that update from Moscow. Let's bring in Jamal Shayal. He's joining us from the Turkish capital, Ankara. And Erdogan earlier on accused Haftar of, quote, running away from the negotiations. What are we to read into Erdogan's comments?
Well, he wants to show the international community that it is Haftar and Haftar's allies who are to blame for any resumption in fighting, for the instability that continues in Libya, and at the same time show that it is his political efforts and those of the Turkish leadership that are trying to establish some sort of peace and push for a political solution. The reality is that that's what has developed over the past 24 hours, at least in the sense that the recognized government of Tripoli, the internationally recognized government of Tripoli, which Turkey backs, has agreed and has signed on the paper which stipulates having an open-ended ceasefire and working towards a political solution, and the ones that haven't have been the other side, namely that of Khalifa Haftar. Obviously, that's put the Russians in a precarious situation because they've supported Haftar so much, both financially and through sending mercenaries militarily. But they are not alone in terms of sponsoring Haftar's project in Libya. There is the United Arab Emirates and Egypt, who obviously have their own considerations as well. Turkey's president insists that things must go on as they have been planned. And as we heard, there had a warning, if that doesn't happen, that he wouldn't hesitate to ensure that Turkey responds to any attack by Haftar's forces.
Okay, Jamal, thank you for that update from Ankara. Let's now find out how this is all impacting on the ground in Libya and bring in Mahmoud Abdelwahid. He's joining us from Tripoli. So what is happening on the ground as all of this takes place outside of the Libyan capital, Mahmoud?
Well, Doreen, it's quiet on the front lines, but it is still very tense. Like I said earlier, we're getting reports from government military sources saying that Haftar's forces are now sending reinforcements and repositioning, regrouping in certain axes in southern Tripoli. But part of the reason why the peace talks have been derailed in Moscow is that, as you know, Doreen, that Haftar has been supported by regional and local allies. And those allies here, for example, in Libya, they include the remnants of the former regime of Muammar al-Gaddafi. And they have been very hopeful, relying on Haftar to impose the military rule in case he takes control of Tripoli in the country, so that they can reinstate the regime of Muammar al-Gaddafi within Haftar's totalitarian rule. Also, cities here, certain cities and tribes in Libya, they have been investing in Haftar. They have been promised to be part of the new Libya led by Haftar in Tripoli. For instance, the city of Tarhuna, the major supporter of Haftar here, just about 80 kilometers to the southern east of the Libyan capital, Tripoli. It's the major supporter of Haftar here. In fact, it has a central command running the battles in southern Tripoli. This city, only 24 hours ago, the elderly council in that city issued a statement blaming Haftar for what they call going to Moscow without consulting them. So this now, because Haftar now demanded a longer time to consult his allies, I believe that he will definitely consult his local allies and also regional allies. As you know, Egypt and the United Arab Emirates are the major supporters of Haftar. The United Arab Emirates, for example, has been investing a lot in Haftar over the past 4 years, providing Haftar with all advanced weapons, aircrafts, drones. In fact, it has an airbase in the eastern region of Libya. So Egypt, along with United Arab Emirates, the fact that they're supporting what is so-called the counter revolutions in the Middle East, they do not want any partnership with Haftar, for example, the eastern or the western camp led by al-Sarraj, which represents a majority of Libya. They do not want, in fact, a partnership with Haftar. They want Haftar as a totalitarian regime to impose the military rule in Libya.
Okay, Mahmoud, thank you for bringing us right up to speed from Tripoli. Let's now speak to Ibrahim Freyhat. He's an associate professor specializing in conflict resolution at the Doha Institute, joining us here on set. Hi there, thanks for your time with us on the News Hour. So what could be happening right now behind the scenes for the Russians to come out and say, well, hang on a second, Haftar needs 2 days to discuss and decide?
Yeah, well, I think Haftar is under tremendous pressure and from many different sources. There is his main supporter in Abu Dhabi, the United Arab Emirates, who's funding him from day one in his operation against Tripoli. And there is also his local allies, whether it's in Tarhuna or in other places. But also there is another party that also a key player in this crisis, which is Europe, that has been also neutralized in the Moscow talks, what I call. Here, what Moscow is trying to do is trying to do this unilaterally and aside or independently from Europe. So there is the preparation for the Berlin conference that should take place soon, and where Haftar and Sarraj be part of this. So, and here comes Moscow is trying to do this independently from Europe, from the United Arab Emirates, from his local allies. So Haftar is under tremendous pressure, is trying to consult all these parties before he signs, which is not an easy task, because also if he says no, he will come under the pressure of, from Moscow, that Moscow has been a key partner, a key ally for him in the past and now. Now there is the Russian mercenaries that they're fighting with him on the ground, from Wagner company and several other security companies. And also in the past, when he ran into financial crisis in his economy, Russia was the party to allow him to print his money notes in Moscow, and Russia is key player in the whole conflict, because with the Russian intervention, Russia shifts the balance of power, so he can't afford to say no to Russia either.
Okay, but on the note of Russia,
Yes.
what does Russia do next? Because when they brought Haftar and Sarraj to Moscow to reportedly sign a deal and come up with this breakthrough, it didn't happen. So does it put Russia in a precarious position, and does it continue to support Haftar on the ground?
Well, if he says no, then he has many questions that he will have to answer to Russia, because Russia, this is a very detrimental moment for their intervention in Libya, which is taken very seriously.
But what is their end game in Libya?
The end game in Libya, there is, in my view, is only a sort of an agreement, a reconciliation between all the parties, because you cannot eliminate one party over the other, because that's what Haftar is trying to do. By the way, of the conditions that Haftar listed in the Moscow talks, like, for example, keeping or recognizing his forces in the south of Tripoli, and also at some point he refused to talk to the Tripoli government, because in his view, if I sign agreements with Tripoli governments, then I am recognizing them, and the House of Representatives is not recognizing the Tripoli government. So he is trying to impose his conditions in this, and that the government in Tripoli must answer to this. Now, Russia, realizing that what changed the whole scene, Doreen, is that the Turkish agreement, security agreement with Tripoli, and that Russia saw Turkey is intervening in this and trying to shift the balance of power on the ground. So that's why Russia had to step in and try to bring all the parties together and come up with a solution that suits their interest and does not leave Tripoli only for Turkey, who signed the agreement with the government, and also neutralize Russia's rivals, Europe. And that's why he is trying to bring everyone under Moscow's term. And to one last point on this, Doreen, is that in the agreement that they're negotiating now, the implementation of it, the people who are in charge of the implementation will have to be meeting in Moscow, which also means not only the agreement under Moscow's terms, but the implementation as well. And this is a key factor in any agreement, the difference between signing an agreement and the implementation. That could be where the challenge is. And Moscow is trying to control that as well.
Okay, we'll leave it there. We thank you very much for your analysis.